I don't know if inviting them was hope or habit. Maybe after spending your whole life trying to earn love from people who treat affection like a reward system, you stop knowing the difference. My name's Aisha. I'm 29, and for most of my life, I existed in my family as the responsible one. Which sounds like a compliment until you realize it usually means the one expected to survive without help. My younger brother, Rohan, was different. Rohan failed upward. Every bad decision became someone else's responsibility. Meanwhile, when I moved out at 22 and worked back-to-back shifts just to make rent, nobody called me brave. They called me distant. I learned pretty quickly that in my family, sacrifice only counted if it came from them. If it came from me, it was simply expected. Still, I built a life anyway. Slowly. Painfully. I worked mornings at a dental office and nights doing remote customer support. I ate instant noodles for almost a year because saving even $50 extra mattered. I stopped buying things unless they were absolutely necessary. There were nights I cried from exhaustion and still woke up 4 hours later to do it all again. But eventually things changed. I got promoted. Then another promotion after that. I moved into project management. The money improved. Life stabilized. And last year, after nearly 7 years of grinding nonstop, I bought a house. Not a mansion. Not some luxury property. Just a quiet 2-story place in a peaceful neighborhood with a tiny backyard and a kitchen big enough that I could finally host dinners without people balancing plates on their laps. The day I got the keys, I sat alone on the living room floor eating takeout noodles straight from the carton and cried so hard I scared myself. Because for the first time in my life, something felt secure. Mine. Not borrowed. Not temporary. Mine. And stupidly, some part of me thought my family might finally see me differently. Maybe success would make them respect me. Maybe owning something they couldn't dismiss would change things. That was probably my first mistake. The second was inviting them for Thanksgiving. You sure about this? Nisha asked when I told her. She was standing in my kitchen holding grocery bags, watching me unload ingredients like I was preparing for a televised cooking competition. I think so, I said, though even I sounded uncertain. Nisha had known me since college. She'd seen every version of my relationship with my family. The crying on the bathroom floor version. The pretending I didn't care version. The angry version. The exhausted version. She knew exactly how much damage they could do with a single sentence. They're still your family, I said quietly, mostly to convince myself. Nisha sighed. That sentence has cost you a lot. I ignored that. Or tried to. The truth was I wanted one normal holiday. Just one. No tensión. No comparisons. No passive-aggressive comments disguised as concern. I spent 3 straight days preparing. Cleaning every room. Polishing dishes I barely used. Cooking enough food for 12 people even though only 4 guests were coming. Turkey. Mashed potatoes. Stuffing. Roasted vegetables. Jomatpie. I wanted everything perfect. That should have been another warning sign. People only overprepare when they're afraid love can disappear over tiny mistakes. By the time Thanksgiving evening arrived, my nerves were wrecked. Nisha came early to help. She adjusted candles while I checked the oven for the 6th time. You realize nobody normal irons napkins, right? She asked. I'm trying to create an atmosphere. You're trying to survive emotionally. I laughed despite myself. Then the doorbell rang. And suddenly the entire house felt smaller. I opened the door to find my parents standing there with Rohan behind them scrolling through his phone. No one hugged me. My mother walked in first, looking around slowly. This neighborhood is quieter than I expected, she said. Not congratulations. Not your home is beautiful. Just evaluation. My father barely glanced at me before asking, got anything stronger than wine? And Rohan? He gave me a quick nod like we were co-workers trapped in the same elevator. No gift. No dessert. No thank you for hosting. Nothing. Still, I smiled. Still, I told myself to keep trying. Dinner started awkwardly but manageable. There were long pauses between conversations. Forks scraping plates. Fake politeness stretched thin over old resentment. I kept waiting for the tension to ease. It never did. My mother criticized my cooking without directly criticizing it. A little dry, she murmured after tasting the turkey. My father complained the wine was too expensive, and somehow not expensive enough at the same time. Rohan spent half the meal texting. And somehow I still kept trying. I hate admitting that now. About halfway through dinner, my father suddenly reached down beside his chair and picked up a leather folder I hadn't noticed earlier. Something about the movement made my stomach tighten. He placed the folder on the table carefully. Too carefully. Then, he slid a folded document toward me. At first, I genuinely thought it was paperwork related to taxes or insurance. Maybe something he wanted advice about. "What's this?" I asked.
"Open it," he said. His voice was calm. Too calm.
I unfolded the paper slowly and felt my heartbeat stop. Eviction notice. My name. My address. 7 days to vacate the property. For a second, my brain refused to process what I was reading. I actually checked the page twice because it didn't make sense. "What is this?" I whispered. Then my mother smiled. Actually smiled. 7 days should be enough, she said lightly. Your brother needs the house more than you do. The room went completely still. I looked up at her, certain I'd misheard. What? Rohan finally looked away from his phone. You're doing fine, Aisha, he said casually, like this was reasonable. You can afford another place. I can't. I stared at him. At all of them. My father folded his hands together calmly. We've already started the process, he said. Don't make things difficult. The process. Like they were discussing paperwork. Like they weren't sitting in my dining room trying to steal the home I nearly destroyed myself building. Something cold settled inside me then. Not rage. Not panic. Something worse. Clarity. Because suddenly every single memory lined up perfectly. Every time they minimized me. Every time they treated my sacrifices like obligations. Every time Rohan failed, and they quietly shifted responsibility toward me. It had always been leading here. I looked back down at the fake eviction notice in my hands. And, weirdly, I stopped feeling shocked. I just felt tired. Deeply tired. Like I'd finally reached the end of pretending these people would someday become different. You can't be serious, I said quietly. My father's expression hardened. It's already happening. I should have screamed. Thrown them out. Lost control. Instead, I folded the paper neatly and placed it beside my plate. Then I said the one thing none of them expected. Okay. Rohan blinked. My mother looked relieved. And my father relaxed slightly, like he'd been preparing for a fight that never came. That's when Nisha stepped out from the kitchen. She'd been silent the entire time. Watching. Listening. Waiting. Without saying a word, she walked to the table holding a sealed envelope. Then she placed it directly in front of my father. You should read this, she said calmly. My father frowned immediately. What is this supposed to be? Open it. Something in her voice changed the air in the room. Even my mother noticed. My father tore the envelope open impatiently, pulled out the documents, started reading, and then everything changed. The confidence vanished from his face so fast it almost didn't look real. His eyes widened, his jaw tightened, and slowly the color drained from his skin. My mother leaned closer. What is it? But my father didn't answer. Because for the first time that night, he looked afraid. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The only sound in the room was the faint ticking of the clock above my stove. My father kept staring at the papers like he was waiting for them to rearrange themselves into something less terrifying. What is it? My mother asked again, sharper this time. Still nothing. Nisha crossed her arms beside me. Go ahead, she said calmly. Read it out loud. My father finally looked up at her, irritated and cornered at the same time. This is private.
No, Nisha replied.
What you brought into this house made it everyone's business. I stayed quiet. Part of me wanted to grab the papers from him and end the suspense. Another part wanted him to feel it. The embarrassment. The panic. The sudden realization that he wasn't in control. He stopped midway, rereading the paragraph like he didn't trust his own eyes. It says the property is protected under a registered housing trust. My mother frowned immediately. What does that even mean? Before he could answer, Rohan scoffed from across the table. So what? It's still her house. No, Nisha said. Legally, it's more complicated than that. Rohan leaned back in his chair again, trying to look unconcerned, but I noticed the first crack in his confidence. What's that supposed to mean? I finally spoke. It means nobody can force me out, I said. My father's eyes snapped toward me. I held his stare steadily. I transferred the property into a trust 6 months ago. Silence. My mother blinked. Why would you do that? I almost laughed. Because even now she didn't ask what drove me to protect myself from my own family. Only why I dared to do it. After Rohan asked me for 50,000 rupees and got angry when I refused, I said evenly, I realized I needed legal protection. That's ridiculous, Rohan muttered. No, I said. What's ridiculous is sitting in my dining room with a fake eviction notice. His face tightened. My father finally found his voice again. You're overreacting, he snapped, though there was less confidence behind it now. Nobody was stealing anything. Nisha raised an eyebrow. You literally tried to remove her from her own home. We were handling a family matter privately. With fraudulent legal documents, she shot back. That word landed hard. Fraudulent. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Wait, she said slowly, looking at my father. The notice isn't real? My father hesitated for half a second too long. And suddenly I understood something important. My mother hadn't known. Not fully. Maybe she'd believe my father when he told her there was a legal loophole. Maybe she'd convinced herself this was temporary.
But now?
Now she was realizing just how far things had gone. You said it was legal, she whispered to him. It should have worked, Rohan muttered under his breath. Every head turned toward him. The second the words left his mouth, he knew he'd made a mistake. Nisha gave a short, humorless laugh.
Wow.
Rohan rolled his eyes defensively. Oh, please. Don't act shocked. She has a whole house to herself while I'm drowning. You're drowning because you refuse to grow up, I said before I could stop myself. The room went still again. Rohan stared at me. That hit him harder than yelling ever would have. Because my family had spent years training me to soften every truth, to cushion every criticism, to apologize for every boundary. And for once, I wasn't doing it. You think you're better than me now? He asked quietly.
No, I said.
Then I looked around the table slowly. I think I stopped shrinking myself so you could feel bigger. Nobody spoke after that. Not immediately. My father looked exhausted suddenly. Older. Like the night wasn't unfolding the way he'd rehearsed in his head. He flipped through the papers again. That's when he reached the final page. And went pale all over again. My stomach tightened slightly. He'd found the clause. What? My mother asked nervously. My father swallowed hard before reading aloud. Any attempt to intimidate, coerce, or fraudulently obtain possession of the protected property may result in civil and criminal action. His voice faded. Nisha finished for him. Including fraud charges. My mother looked horrified. Rohan sat upright. Hold on. And, Nisha added calmly, there's already evidence. My father's head jerked upward. What evidence? Nisha lifted her phone. The realization hit all three of them at once. She'd recorded everything. From the moment the eviction notice hit the table. Every threat, every admission, every smug little comment. The silence after that was suffocating. Rohan was the first to break. You recorded us? He snapped. You tried to illegally pressure my best friend out of her own home, Nisha replied. What did you expect? That's insane. No, I said quietly. This is insane. I picked up the fake eviction notice from beside my plate. The paper shook slightly in my hand. Not from fear anymore, but adrenaline finally catching up to me. I invited you here because I thought maybe we could have one normal holiday, I said. One. Nobody interrupted me. I cooked for you. I opened my home to you. My voice tightened despite myself. And you walked in planning this. My mother looked down at the table. Rohan looked annoyed more than guilty. And my father? He finally looked ashamed. But not ashamed enough. Because even then I could see him calculating. Trying to figure out how bad this could get. How much trouble he was actually in. How much do you want? He asked suddenly. The question stunned me. Nisha actually laughed in disbelief. My father mistook my silence for negotiation. We can settle this privately, he continued quickly. There's no need to involve lawyers or police. There it was. Not regret. Damage control. You still think this is about money? I said softly. Aisha. No, I stood up slowly from the table. You don't get to do this, and then buy your way out once it fails. His expression hardened again. So what now? I walked to the front door and opened it. You leave. My mother looked up immediately. Aisha. Leave, I repeated. For a moment nobody moved. Then my father carefully folded the legal papers and stood. Rohan pushed his chair back aggressively. This is unbelievable, he muttered. I looked directly at him. No, I said. What's unbelievable is that you thought I'd hand over my life because you asked. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Because there wasn't a defense for this. Not a real one. My mother stood last. For one brief second, she looked like she might apologize. Instead, she said quietly, "You're choosing strangers over your family." The words hurt. Not because they were true, because some part of me had spent years terrified they would say them. But standing there in my own doorway, watching the people who tried to take my home from me, something finally clicked into place. Nisha wasn't the stranger. They were. I looked at my mother steadily. Family doesn't do this. She flinched. That was the only sign any of them had left that still looked human. Then they walked out.
No yelling.
No dramatic final speech. Just silence and the sound of footsteps disappearing down my driveway. I closed the door slowly, locked it. And the second the latch clicked shut, my knees nearly gave out. Nisha caught my arm before I hit the floor. "Hey," she said softly. And just like that, all the control I'd held together through dinner cracked apart. Because the worst part wasn't the fake eviction notice. It wasn't the manipulation. It wasn't even the betrayal. It was realizing they had fully expected me to surrender, like my life belonged to them by default. I sat on the kitchen floor crying while Thanksgiving dinner went cold on the table behind me. And somewhere around midnight, after the tears finally stopped, my phone buzzed. Dad calling. I stared at the screen until it stopped. Then another call came. And another. By morning, I had 17 missed calls, along with one voicemail that began with, "Aisha, there's been a misunderstanding." I listened to the voicemail 3 times before deleting it. Not because I needed clarity, because I couldn't believe the nerve. A misunderstanding. That was the word my father chose after trying to pressure me out of my own home with a fake legal notice. Not mistake. Not betrayal. Not, "I'm sorry." Just a misunderstanding. Like somebody brought the wrong dessert to dinner. I was sitting at my kitchen island in sweatpants, staring at my phone while cold coffee sat untouched beside me. Across the room, Nisha was curled into the corner of the couch with one of my blankets. She looked up when she noticed my expression. "Still calling?" 17 missed calls. She whistled softly. "That's not guilt," she said. "That's panic."
I knew she was right.
My father never chased people emotionally. He controlled situations.
Directed them.
Managed outcomes. If he was calling this much, it meant he'd finally realized he'd lost control of one. I should have blocked the number immediately. Instead, against my better judgment, I called him back. He answered before the first ring finished.
"Aisha."
Relief flooded his voice, so quickly it almost sounded rehearsed. I leaned back in my chair.
"I'm listening."
A short pause. Then his tone shifted into that careful, measured voice he used whenever he wanted something. About last night, things got emotional. I actually laughed. Not loudly. Just once. Sharp and disbelieving. "You showed up with a fake eviction notice. We didn't intend for it to escalate. You intended for me to leave my house." "Aisha."
"No, interrupted."
"Don't soften it now." Silence. For a moment, I thought he might actually apologize. Instead, he sighed heavily, like I was making this difficult for him. "Your brother is struggling," he said. "You know that." There it was. Always back to Rohan. Always. He needs stability right now. "And your solution was stealing mine?" It wasn't stealing. The speed of his response almost impressed me. I closed my eyes briefly. "You really believe that, don't you?" "We're family," he said immediately, like that answered everything. I leaned forward slowly. That sentence only seems to matter when you want something from me. Another pause. Then his patience started slipping. "You have more than enough," he said. "One person doesn't need a whole house." I looked around my kitchen. The framed art I bought after saving for months. The coffee machine I rewarded myself with after my promotion. The little herb garden growing near the window because I finally had space for one. Every inch of this house represented years of sacrifice no one had witnessed because no one had cared enough to look. "You know what's interesting?" I said quietly. "What?" "You've never once asked how I managed to afford any of this." That caught him off guard. "What?" You've never asked what I gave up to build my life. My voice stayed calm, but barely. You just looked at the result and decided it should belong to somebody else. Aisha, nobody said that. You literally tried to evict me. His tone hardened immediately. You're being dramatic. There it was. The phrase every manipulative person reaches for when accountability gets uncomfortable. I almost smiled, because suddenly I wasn't emotional anymore. I was tired, and tired people stop being easy to control. You forged legal documents, I said flatly. Do you understand how serious that is? It wasn't forged.
Oh.
It was, he hesitated. A draft. I blinked once. A draft eviction notice. Yes. You handed me a fake legal document during Thanksgiving dinner. We were trying to avoid conflict. I stared at the phone in disbelief. The mental gymnastics were honestly incredible. You threatened me in my own home. We gave you options. No, I said quietly. You gave me an ultimatum. Another silence stretched between us. Then he tried a different approach.
His voice softened.
You know your mother barely slept last night. There it was.
Guilt.
The family currency. She's very upset. I'm sure she is. She feels like she's losing you. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were manipulative. Because some small part of me still wanted them to hurt. I hated that. She should have thought about that before smiling while you tried to take my house. He exhaled sharply. We handled things badly. That was the closest thing to accountability he'd offered so far. Still carefully vague. Still designed to spread blame evenly across everyone.
We.
I asked. Or you. His silence answered for him. Interesting. Very interesting. Because suddenly, I wasn't sure everyone had known the full plan. My mother clearly knew enough. Rohan definitely knew. But my father? He was the architect. The strategist. The one who believed he could pressure me quietly enough that I'd fold before asking questions. And, honestly, a year ago, maybe I would have. That realization made me feel sick. Aisha, he said carefully, we don't want lawyers involved. Of course they didn't. People only fear consequences when they know they crossed a line. You should have thought about that sooner. We can move past this. I laughed again, this time louder. You really think this is something people move past? You're making this bigger than it needs to be.
No, irreplaceably.
I think I'm finally seeing it clearly. That shut him up. Because people like my father survive, through confusion, through guilt, through making you question whether your pain is reasonable. Clarity is dangerous to them. What do you want? He asked finally. The question surprised me. Not because I didn't know the answer. Because nobody in my family had ever asked before. Not really. I thought about it for a second. Then I said, I want peace. Silence. Then he replied carefully, we can have that. No, I said. You can't. His voice sharpened instantly. What's that supposed to mean? It means peace, and you don't seem to exist in the same room. The quiet after that felt different. Colder. Then finally he said, so what now?
Now.
Such a small word, for something this permanent. I stood and walked slowly toward my living room window. Outside, the neighborhood looked calm. Normal. A dog walker crossing the street. Wind moving leaves along the sidewalk. People living ordinary lives untouched by this kind of family madness. I suddenly wanted that more than anything. No more contact, I said quietly. My father went silent. Then, you don't mean that.
Ido.
Aisha. No calls.
No visits.
No showing up at my house pretending we're fixing things. My voice steadied with every word. I'm done. You'd cut off your own family over this? I almost answered emotionally. Almost. Then I stopped myself. Because that question depended on pretending this was only about one night. It wasn't. It was about 29 years of being treated like I existed to absorb damage. No, I said softly. This started long before yesterday.
He didn't respond.
For the first time in my life, my father had no argument left.
No ángel. No le verí.
Just silence. Then finally, you'll regret this. And there it was. Not sadness. Not heartbreak. A threat wrapped in disappointment. I felt something inside me settle permanently. No, I said. I think staying would have been a regret. Then I hung up. My hands shook afterward. Not from fear. From adrenaline. From grief. From the strange, horrible feeling of finally choosing yourself after years of choosing everyone else. Nisha walked into the kitchen slowly. Well, I stared at the dark phone screen. It's over. She studied my face carefully. Do you believe that? I wanted to say yes. I really did. But something in my chest still felt unsettled. Like the story hadn't finished yet. And 3 hours later, someone started pounding on my front door. The pounding started, so suddenly it made me jump. Not knocking. Pounding. Heavy.
Fast.
Aggressive. The kind of sound that instantly puts your body on alert before your brain catches up. Nisha looked toward the door from the kitchen. Please tell me that's not them. Another bang rattled through the house. I already knew. Something in me recognized the rhythm of desperation. I walked toward the front hallway slowly, while my pulse climbed higher with every step. The security camera feed lit up on my phone. My parents stood on the porch. Rohan paced behind them with his hands shoved into his pockets, already irritated. I almost didn't open the door. Honestly, I should have left them outside. But part of me needed to see their faces. Needed confirmation that the distance I felt now was real. I unlocked the door carefully and opened it halfway. I didn't invite them in. That detail mattered. What do you want? I asked. My mother immediately stepped forward. Aisha, please. Just listen for 1 minute. Her makeup was smudged slightly beneath her eyes, like she'd either been crying or trying very hard to look like she had. My father stood stiffly beside her, jaw tight. Rohan looked annoyed to even be there. We already talked, I said. No, you talked, my father replied sharply. You hung up. I stared at him. You threatened me. His expression shifted immediately. We did not threaten you. You forged legal documents and told me to leave my own house. We were trying to help your brother. There it is again, I said quietly. My mother stepped in quickly before things escalated. Sweetheart, nobody handled this properly. Emotions got out of control. I almost smiled. That sentence was doing a lot of work, as if emotions were the problem, not entitlement. Not manipulation, not greed. Emotions. Behind me, Nisha appeared in the hallway holding her phone casually at her side. The second my father noticed her, his shoulders tightened. Good. You recorded us illegally, Rohan snapped suddenly. Nisha blinked at him. In a house where one participant consented? She asked. That's adorable. His face darkened immediately. You think you're funny? No, she said calmly. I think you're reckless. He took a step forward. My body reacted before my mind did. I moved directly into the doorway. Don't. One word. Flat. Cold. Rohan stopped. And for the first time since they arrived, I saw something unfamiliar flicker across his face. Not arrogance. Not irritation. Uncertainty. Because I wasn't backing down anymore. My father exhaled heavily, like he was exhausted by all this. Aisha, he said, forcing calm into his voice, we can settle this privately. There's nothing to settle. You're seriously willing to destroy your relationship with your family over a misunderstanding? That word again. Misunderstanding. I looked at him for a long second. Then something inside me finally cracked open, not emotionally, but honestly. You know what the worst part is? I asked quietly. Nobody answered. I spent years thinking if I worked hard enough, succeeded enough, gave enough, eventually you'd love me the way you love him. My mother's eyes widened slightly. Rohan looked away first. I thought buying this house would make you proud of me. I laughed softly at myself. God, that sounds pathetic out loud. Aisha, my mother started.
No.
Let me finish. My voice wasn't loud. That made it worse. Do you know what I realized last night? I asked. You looked at the biggest achievement of my life, and your first instinct was figuring out how to give it to Rohan. Silence. Nobody denied it. Because they couldn't. My father rubbed his forehead impatiently. You're twisting things. No, I said. I'm finally seeing them correctly. That hit him harder than yelling ever could. People like my father depend on confusion. The second you describe their behavior clearly, they lose power. My mother suddenly stepped forward again, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. We made mistakes, she whispered, but we're still your parents. The words hurt, not enough to change my mind. but enough to remind me there was once a little girl inside me who would have done anything to hear them say they needed her. I swallowed hard, then answered the truth. You only remember that when you want access to me. My mother flinched like I'd slapped her. Rohan groaned loudly behind them. Oh my God, are we seriously doing this? He snapped. It's just a house. Everything went quiet. Even the wind outside seemed to disappear. I looked at him slowly. You really believe that? It is just a house, he said defensively. People move all the time. I nodded once, then asked softly. So, why didn't you move? That landed directly where it needed to. His face hardened immediately. You think you're better than everyone because you got lucky.
Lucky.
That word almost made me laugh. Lucky was inheriting stability. Lucky was always having someone rescue you. Lucky was failing repeatedly without consequences because your family cushioned every fall. I worked 2 jobs until my body started giving out from stress. I built my life while nobody was looking. There was nothing lucky about it. I wasn't lucky, I said quietly. I was alone. The words hung there heavier than anything else I'd said, because they were true, painfully true. And deep down, I think all 3 of them knew it. My father suddenly straightened. His patience was gone now. So this is it, he asked coldly. You're choosing strangers over your family? I almost answered immediately. Then I stopped, because that question had controlled me for years. Family, family, family. As if blood excused everything. As if DNA erased cruelty. I glanced back toward Nisha standing behind me. The woman who showed up every single time my life fell apart. The woman who helped me move into this house. Who sat with me through panic attacks. Who defended me without hesitation. Then I looked back at the people standing on my porch. And something became unbelievably clear. Family doesn't try to take your home, I said. Nobody spoke. Not even Rohan. My father stared at me for several long seconds. Then finally nodded once. A small movement. Cold. Final. You'll regret this, he said quietly. Not sadness. Not disappointment. Punishment. Even now, he needed the last word to feel like a threat. But strangely, I wasn't afraid anymore. Because the worst thing had already happened. I'd finally seen them clearly. And once you stop idealizing people, they lose the ability to destroy you. I looked directly at him. No, I said calmly. I regret how long I kept begging people like you to love me correctly. My mother broke then. Actually broke. She covered her mouth and started crying openly. For one dangerous second, guilt punched straight through me. Old instincts rushed back instantly. Fix it. Comfort her. Apologize. Make peace. But then I remembered her smiling at the dinner table while they handed me that eviction notice. And the guilt disappeared. Not completely. Just enough. My father placed a hand on her arm. Come on. Rohan looked furious, embarrassed, trapped, all at once. But none of them argued anymore. Because somewhere along the line, they finally realized this version of me wasn't negotiable. They walked back toward the driveway slowly.
No dramatic exit. No screaming.
Just quiet footsteps fading into the evening. I closed the door carefully, locked it, and stood there staring at it for several seconds after they were gone. My whole body suddenly felt exhausted. Like I'd been carrying something impossibly heavy for years without noticing the weight until I finally set it down. Behind me, Nisha spoke softly. You okay? I surprised myself by answering honestly. I think I am. And for the first time in my life, I actually meant it. The strange thing about finally cutting people off isn't the drama. It's the silence afterward. No angry messages.
No surprise visits.
No emotional speeches outside my door. Just quiet. For the first week, I kept expecting another confrontation. Every time headlights slowed near my house, my stomach tightened. Every unknown number made my chest tense. I slept lightly, like my nervous system hadn't realized the danger was gone yet. But nothing happened. No calls.
No texts. No emails.
It felt unnatural at first. My family had always existed like background noise in my life. Constant guilt, constant pressure, constant emotional static humming behind everything I did. Without it, the house sounded different. Peaceful. Which honestly made me emotional in ways I wasn't prepared for. One morning, about 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, I woke up before my alarm and just stayed in bed.
No anxiety.
No replaying conversations in my head.
No imaginary arguments.
Sunlight came through the curtains while rain tapped softly against the windows, and for the first time in years, my mind felt quiet enough to hear it. I cried harder that morning than I had the night they left, because I finally understood how exhausted I'd been. Nisha noticed the changes before I did. "You're not apologizing every 5 minutes anymore," she said one evening while helping me reorganize the garage. I did that. All the time. I frowned. No, I didn't. She just stared at me. Then, very dramatically, she put down the storage box she was holding and started counting on her fingers. "Sorry for bothering you. Sorry for asking. Sorry for venting. Sorry for taking up space. Sorry for needing help. Sorry for crying." I blinked. "Oh, yeah," she said. "Oh." That hit harder than I expected, because I hadn't even realized how much of my personality had been built around making myself smaller for other people's comfort. I spent years trying not to become inconvenient. Not too emotional. Not too successful. Not too angry. Not too proud. Every achievement came with this weird instinct to downplay it before someone else did. Even buying a house. When coworkers congratulated me, I caught myself saying things like, "It's not that big. The market was decent. I just got lucky."
Lucky.
Funny how easily I'd repeated the same language my family used to minimize me. After Thanksgiving, I stopped doing that. Not intentionally at first. It just faded. One afternoon, I was watering plants in the backyard when my elderly neighbor, Mr. Dutta, leaned over the fence. "House suits you," he said casually. I smiled automatically, then paused. Because for once, I didn't shrink the compliment. "Thanks," I said simply. "I worked hard for it." He grinned.
Good.
"You should say that proudly." The weird part? I almost felt guilty hearing it. That's how deep this stuff goes. Around the third week, a package arrived unexpectedly. No return name. Just my address written in my mother's handwriting. My stomach dropped the second I saw it. Nisha was over again. She practically lived at my house by then, and immediately noticed my expression. "You want me to open it?" I shook my head slowly. Part of me didn't want to touch it at all, but curiosity won. Inside the box were photo albums. Old ones. Childhood birthdays. School ceremonies. Family vacations I barely remembered. And sitting on top was a folded note. I recognized my mother's handwriting instantly. "Aisha, I know you probably don't want to hear from us right now. Maybe you never will again. I found these while cleaning and thought you should have them. You were always the one who kept memories of things. I'm sorry for how everything happened. I know that isn't enough, but I am sorry. Love, Mom." I read it twice, then a third time. Nisha stayed quiet beside me. "You okay?" she asked eventually. "I don't know." And that was the truth. Because the note wasn't some dramatic apology. It didn't excuse anything. Didn't magically repair years of damage. But it was the first time anyone in my family had acknowledged hurting me without immediately justifying it afterward. That mattered. Even if it came too late. I spent hours flipping through the photo albums that night. And honestly, that might have hurt more than the fight itself. Because the pictures proved something painful. We weren't miserable all the time. There were good moments. Real ones. My dad teaching me how to ride a bicycle. My mom helping me decorate birthday cakes. Rohan asleep on my shoulder during a road trip when he was little. For a while, I just sat there staring at those photos trying to understand how people who once loved each other normally could end up becoming strangers. "You thinking about calling her?" Nisha asked softly. I looked down at the note. Then toward the living room window where the lights from neighboring houses glowed warm against the dark street outside. Families eating dinner. Watching television. Living ordinary lives. I think, I said slowly, I spent years confusing love with obligation. Nisha stayed quiet. My parents loved me. I continued. I know they did. Past tense. I thought about that carefully, then shook my head.
No.
Present tense. She looked surprised. Then why cut them off? Because that was the part people never understood. Love and safety are not always the same thing. Sometimes people love you and still damage you. Sometimes they love you in ways that leave scars. And sometimes loving someone isn't enough reason to keep letting them hurt you. I can love them, I said quietly, and still know I'm healthier without them close to me. Nisha nodded slowly. That's probably the most emotionally mature thing anyone's ever said in this house. I laughed despite myself. Then I looked back down at the photos. At the little girl smiling in pictures before she learned affection could feel conditional. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel angry at her for still wanting her family. I just felt sad for how hard she worked to earn what should have been given freely. About a month later, I got another call. Not from my father. Not from my mother. From Rohan. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. So I picked up. Neither of us spoke for a second. Then finally, quietly, my brother said, "I think Dad's in trouble." For a second, I thought I'd heard him wrong. Not because of the words, because of the tone. Rohan didn't sound arrogant. Didn't sound defensive. He sounded scared. I stayed quiet, waiting. "He lost his job," Rohan said finally. I blinked slowly.
What?
"He got fired last week." I sat down at the kitchen table, without meaning to. Outside, rain tapped lightly against the windows again, soft and steady. "What happened?" I asked carefully. Another pause. Then, someone reported the eviction thing. My stomach tightened, not because I felt guilty, because I suddenly understood why my father had panicked so badly after seeing those legal papers. His company had strict compliance policies. I remembered him bragging about that years ago. Anything involving fraud, even outside work, could trigger investigations. He didn't think anyone would actually take it seriously, Rohan muttered bitterly. I closed my eyes briefly. Someone had. Maybe the lawyer. Maybe somebody connected to the paperwork. Maybe the recording had scared him into confessing something before he could control the damage. Either way, consequences had finally caught up to him. And judging by Rohan's voice, the fallout was ugly. "How's Mom?" I asked quietly. "Tired." That one word carried more weight than an entire explanation. I pictured her sitting at the kitchen table in my parents' house, exhausted and overwhelmed, trying to hold together a life that suddenly didn't look stable anymore. A part of me still hated imagining her hurting. That probably never goes away completely. "He's blaming everybody," Rohan continued. "The lawyer."
You. Me. Mom.
He let out a humorless laugh. "Mostly me." That surprised me less. When people spend years avoiding accountability, they don't suddenly become reflective during crisis. They look for exits, scapegoats, anyone else to carry the weight. "What do you want me to say, Rohan?" "I don't know." And weirdly enough, I believed him. There was no manipulation in his voice this time. No performance. Just exhaustion. For the first time in our lives, my brother sounded like someone standing in the wreckage of consequences without knowing how he got there. "You really scared him that night," he admitted quietly. "That wasn't my intention." "I know." He paused. "I think that made it worse." Silence settled between us. Not hostile this time, just unfamiliar. Then, after a long pause, he asked the question I never expected from him. "Were we really that bad to you?" The words hit me harder than Thanksgiving had, because suddenly I realized something devastating. He genuinely didn't know. Not fully. Rohan had spent his entire life benefiting from favoritism without ever examining what it cost the person standing beside him. That's the thing about being protected all the time. You rarely notice who's absorbing the damage for you. I leaned back slowly in my chair. "How honest do you want me to be?" Another quiet laugh. "Probably less honest than you're about to be." I almost smiled. Then I answered anyway. "You know what hurt most?" I said softly. "It wasn't that Mom and Dad favored you." He stayed silent. "It's that eventually you started believing you deserved more than me too." The line went completely quiet. I stared at the rain sliding down the kitchen window while years of memories moved through my head. Rohan taking money from me without saying thanks. Rohan borrowing my car and returning it damaged. Rohan rolling his eyes whenever my parents praised me for anything. Thin moments. But enough of them become a pattern eventually. "I didn't think about it like that," he admitted. "I know. That sounds bad." "It is bad." He exhaled slowly. And then something happened that shocked me more than the fake eviction notice ever had. "I'm sorry." Just that. No excuse attached. No but.
No blame shifting.
A real apology. Small. Awkward.
Late.
But real. I felt tears sting my eyes immediately, which annoyed me. Because healing should not be this emotional. "You tried to take my house," I whispered. "I know." You sat there like I owed it to you. Another silence. Then quietly. I think everybody spent so long treating you like the strong one that we forgot you were a person. That one broke something open inside me. Not anger.
Grief.
Because he was right. I'd become infrastructure to my family. Reliable. Useful.
Stable.
Not someone who needed protecting too. I wiped quickly at my face before speaking again. So what now? Rohan laughed softly, exhausted. I honestly don't know. For once in his life, he sounded honest about that. We talked for almost another hour. Not perfectly. Not magically. There were still defensive moments. Long pauses. Old wounds sitting between sentences. But for the first time ever, it felt like talking to a real person instead of the role my family had built around him. Before hanging up, he said quietly, I don't think Dad's ever going to admit he was wrong. I know, but Mom does. That hurt too, because I believed that. I'm not ready, I said carefully. I figured. Another pause. Then, I don't think anybody expected you to actually leave. I looked around my kitchen, my home, the place I almost let guilt destroy. They should have. After the call ended, I sat there for a long time in silence. Not devastated. Not relieved. Just thoughtful. People always imagine endings as dramatic things. Doors slamming. Big speeches.
Permanent clarity.
But real endings are quieter.
Messier.
Sometimes healing looks less like forgiveness and more like distance. Sometimes closure is simply realizing you deserved better long before anyone apologized for giving you less. A few days later, I packed the photo albums into storage boxes and placed them carefully in the hallway closet. Not thrown away. Not displayed. Just kept. Like the relationship itself. Then I walked through my house turning off lights one by one before bed. The living room. The hallway. The kitchen. And when I reached the stairs, I paused for a second and looked around at everything I'd built. Every sacrifice. Every exhausted night. Every moment I kept going alone. Nobody could take that from me anymore. Not my parents. Not my brother. Not even the version of myself that once believed love had to be earned through suffering. For the first time in my life, this house didn't just feel like proof that I'd survived. It felt like proof that I finally understood my own worth. And honestly, that was the part they never saw coming.